we're going to have a look at Belfast Confetti today. Belfast Confetti is a poem, it's written in the first person, and the speaker is describing being caught in a bomb blast in Belfast in Ireland. He talks about how he tries to escape from the kind of confusion and all the chaos that's going on around him, and he talks about how disoriented he feels. So I've written that at the top of my plot. At the bottom, I've put in a note about context. Now, hopefully you've already looked at this a little bit, but Belfast Confetti was written in 1990 when in Ireland what was called the Troubles were still going on. The Troubles were arguments, fights between Unionists and Nationalists over whether Northern Ireland should be a part of the Republic of Ireland or the UK. So what happened was terrorists were really frequently attacking in Belfast on both sides, really. There was a really big British Army presence, which some people would argue sort of exacerbated the problem to an extent. And there was just quite a lot of fighting. It became quite a part of normal life for people living in Belfast at that time. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the language on this one. There's quite a bit of language, but there's also a lot of structure to talk about. So I've highlighted those in different colours today, just so you can see the difference. The title of the poem, first of all, the phrase Belfast Confetti. It refers to the nuts and bolts and bits of scrap metal that the IRA and other terrorist organisations used to use for shrapnel inside their bombs. So when a bomb went off, these bits of sharp metal would go flying everywhere. And Belfast Confetti is a bit of an ironic term that was used to describe that. In the first stanza then, it starts off with this line: suddenly as the riot squad moved in, it was raining exclamation marks. And that use of exclamation marks is a metaphor to describe the sort of shock, the panic that was going on. That use of punctuation to describe people's feelings and describe what's actually happening physically around them with the bomb, that's an extended metaphor that runs all the way through the poem. So the poet uses different punctuation types and different pieces of punctuation to describe different things that are going on. So if you look down a little bit further, it talks about a fount of broken type to describe all the bits of metal. The bomb itself as being an asterisk on the map, so that use kind of carries on all the way through. There's also a semantic field built up around ideas of sort of violence and destruction. So you've got a lot of this kind of army or war type language going on, burst and rapid fire. You've got destructive language, broken and stuttering, and that continues right the way through the poem. As you go into the second stanza, the writer starts to talk a bit more about his trying to escape. So the first stanza is a lot about kind of what's going on, the actual bomb going off, and the second bit is him trying to get out of there, trying to escape from the chaos. And he says, I know this labyrinth so well: Baclava, Raglan, Inkerman, Odessa Street. Hopefully you recognise the word Baclava. In this sense, it's actually one of the names of the streets in Belfast. So a lot of streets in Belfast are named after incidents or famous people or events from the Crimean War, which is the war that you looked at when you were in charge of the Light Brigade. The use of those streets, the naming of those streets, sort of develops that theme of war and conflict and people fighting against each other all the way through. So he talks about that. He mentions a lot of army type weaponry, so things like Kremlin 2-mesh, a Saracen, which is a type of tank. Okay, so that adds to that semantic field around war, destruction and violence. And then in your last line, my name, where am I coming from, where am I going, a fusillade of question marks. So he finishes off just like he started, with that use of punctuation as the metaphor for the war that's going on. And that word fusillade, it means a series of rapid shots. So again, it's part of the semantic field of war, but it really symbolises that series of rapid questions that are running through his head. And we can take that to mean not just about the incident itself, but potentially about the ongoing troubles. And this went on for a really long time in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. So in terms of language, there's quite a bit for you there. I'm going to go back up to the top to look at the structure and the form of the poem. The poem starts what we call in medias res, which means in the middle of the action. It starts right off in the middle of the action. You don't get a build up to the story in that sort of structure that you'd usually expect. And that very first word, suddenly, grammatically that should have a punctuation mark, a comma after it. The lack of the comma in this line is used to increase the speed, but it's also quite ironic in a poem where the poet's using different pieces of punctuation to symbolise kind of what's going on. So there's quite a lot of meaning there, the way that it starts very suddenly and the speed's increased with the lack of comma. The lines you'll notice when you look at this poem, they're laid out quite oddly. There's a lot of caesura as you move through the poem. There's some enjambment. There's all sorts of different punctuation being used. That kind of irregular layout and the irregular line length leads to a really fragmented feel to the poem, which is kind of used to symbolise how fragmented societies become at that time in Ireland. When we move from the first stanza into the second stanza, the poet moves from past tense, so he's describing an event that's happened, to present tense. In the second stanza, he talks a lot more about the confusion and the feelings that he feels after the bomb's gone off, and we could take that to mean that that sense of confusion stays with him and stays with the other members of that society all the time. So it's always present. It's not just something that they feel straight after a bomb's gone off or something's happened in that sense. There's again lots of use of caesura here, lots of dashes, question marks, full stops in the middle of lines, that really adds to that fragmented feel as you go along. And I think that's about it for now. So get annotating and let us know if you've got any questions.